Welcome to the second webinar in our MEville to WEville series of webinars. Today's webinar is about assessment and data collection tools in MEville to WEville. Let's get started. We have several objectives for today's time together. First, we're going to review the difference between emergent versus conventional literacy. Then we're going to review the components of a comprehensive emergent literacy program. We'll examine data assessment and data collection tools that are contained within MEville to WEville. And we're going to explore ideas for assessing students who require special adaptations. We know that it is crucial that all learners, including students with complex needs, have access to a comprehensive literacy program. Even our students who are emerging in their understanding of reading and writing. In fact, in order for them to move on to conventional literacy, they need daily opportunities to interact with books, communicate about stories, write about what they read and hear. They need modeling and shared reading and writing opportunities across a variety of text types and purposes. Students who are functionally non-speaking require a means of communication in all areas of their lives and program. They need to learn letters and sounds. They need it all. Literacy instruction is the most important thing we can do to support communication. Let's review. Students who are emerging in their understanding of literacy are beginning to understand the functions of print and print conventions. Developing phonological awareness, alphabet knowledge, and receptive and expressive language skills will allow these students to use reading and writing to communicate with others throughout their lives. Examples of emergent literacy behaviors may include making meaning from a story through pictures rather than through text, looking at the book from back to front or holding it upside down, scribbling, and the use of invented spelling. Some students who are emerging in their understanding of literacy do not yet show an interest in books or print. Conventional literacy refers to reading and writing that follow the form, content, and use of standard conventions. It is built upon discoveries and understandings made during that emergent literacy phase of development. According to the National Reading Panel report, in order to produce and understand conventional literacy, an individual must develop phonemic awareness, phonics, vocabulary, fluency, and comprehension of connected text. Conventional literacy requires the simultaneous and integrated use of these skills to independently construct a message that can be accurately interpreted by other conventional readers. Here are some questions to help you decide if your learners require emergent or conventional interventions. It's important to note that if you answer yes to all of the above questions, so does your student know most of the letters most of the time? Does your student engage actively during shared reading, have a means of communication and interaction, and understand that writing involves letters and words? If you answer yes to all of those questions, then your student would benefit from daily conventional interventions. It doesn't mean that they're necessarily conventional readers and writers yet, but that they are moving towards that, and the interventions you would use would be the ones on the right. If you answer no to those questions, then you would want to use the daily emergent interventions. If you have all emergent learners, then the components that you would use would be the ones on that left-hand screen, that previous screen. And if you had all students who were moving towards conventional literacy, then you would use the daily conventional interventions. But most of us have classrooms that have a combination of these types of students. And so we suggest that you combine the emergent and the conventional interventions. And what you'll see in this list is that Most of these interventions are contained within MEville to WEville, with the exception of a couple of things, and we'll talk about how they differ. So MEville to WEville does focus on emergent learners, and it includes the following components: vocabulary, shared reading and developing concepts of print skills, alphabet and phonological awareness, word wall or sight words, independent writing with access to a full alphabet, and symbol-based communication. But MEville to WEville does include some components for conventional learners as well. The literacy lesson, for example, which is page 4 of every lesson, is appropriate for your students who need conventional interventions. Likewise, the writing lesson, which is page 5 of every lesson, would be appropriate for those learners who are at a higher level. And then the literacy strategies lessons, which are located on the members only site under the resources tab, would be ideal lessons to include your conventional learners in. So that way you are meeting the needs of all of your students. In this webinar, we will explore the assessment and data collection tools in Me2We so that we can measure our students' progress and make important instructional decisions to move all our learners towards conventional literacy. Then, we will look at ways that teachers can adapt their materials and methods to determine the progress of all their students. Let's take a closer look at the assessment areas and the tools that are found in MEville to WEville for each of the components so that we can track these skills. There are vocabulary assessments, pre and post, concepts of print skills assessment. We have alphabet, so letter ID, and phonological awareness assessments, sound symbol correspondence. Our word wall component can be measured with the sight word identification tool, and we have a writing assessment that contains a really helpful developmental writing scale. In addition to these tools that are found on the members only site, I'm also going to share with you a tool called the Emergent Literacy Behaviors Checklist. This is a checklist that was developed by a group of teachers in Alberta that were involved in a pilot project called Literacy for All. I have shared a link to that website that they created on that TCDSB MEville to WEville site I created, but I will post a copy of this checklist for you in the webinar section after today, so you'll have access to it. So after we're going to look at each of those tools, and then we're going to consider how students would demonstrate their learning, typically developing students or not necessarily typically developing, but students who can do so in a typical way, and students who can't do so in a typical way. And we'll look at things very specifically. We'll look to that action dictionary for materials and ideas to adapt the assessment to support those students. Like many of our webinars, we are going to start at the members only site. This is where you will locate and download all the assessment and data collection tools. So we're going to jump to the members only site, and here I will go to my MEville to WEville complete collection. Under the assessments tab, I will find I'm going to click on the assessment plus sign here, and all of the assessment tools and data collection tools are located here. So you would click on each one of these, download them to your computer, and then print them off. Now I've already done that, and so I'm going to walk you through each one of these as we move along here. So our first tool that we're going to examine, there are two tools to assess vocabulary. So there's one tool that is a PDF that contains all of the vocabulary words for units 1, 2, and 3, and a place for you to indicate a pre and post assessment. it also contains the word wall words. But then there's another tool that you can use to kind of get a little more information about the degree to which your students show understanding of the words. So just to have a closer look at those. So here is the vocabulary word identification. You can see Unit 1. If you're assessing just words only, you would use this side. If you're doing words with pictures, you would use this side of the chart. Remember that all of these words and with picture symbols are located in your kit. You have copies of these and you can use them for the assessment. Now, some people prefer to use something that has a little bit more information, and so the makers of MEville to WEville created this data collection form that contains, that's not the one, sorry, this one, that contains, again, all of the Unit 1 words and a series of dates that you can use to indicate where the student is in terms of their understanding of the word. And there's a key provided here. Whether the student was just exposed to the word, you'd give them a 1. Whether they reacted to or showed interest in the word, they would get a 2, and so on. So this is for students who are not showing a clear understanding of the word, but you want to be able to capture that there is some level of recognition or understanding that is taking place over time. So this tool helps with that. So what does this look like for a student who could show this in a typical way? Well, we could show a choice of 3 of the picture symbol cards that are the vocabulary cards and ask the student to choose the one that means girl, or point to the one that means girl. You could also use just the word cards if students are at that stage, but it's perfectly acceptable to use the picture symbols as well. And so the student would just choose the card that means that vocabulary word. But what if you have a student who can't point? They are physically unable to point to the word. So I can use my action dictionary to find ideas for alternative ways to point. And so if I go to that page, and I believe I already have it open here, in the action dictionary there are lists of ideas, you'll recall, that describe different ways that a student could perform an action, in this case it's point, if they can't do so in a typical way. And so there are ideas here like using a slanted book and have students eye gaze towards it, using a framed border or a counting frame to help students see different choices and then indicate their choice, and so on. So I'm going to show you what that might look like for this particular assessment. So if we have a student who cannot point, again we can show them the 3 picture symbol cards, but rather than asking them to point, we can ask them to use their eyes to point to the word that means girl. You could position those cards in a pocket chart and have them gaze towards their choice. I've also shown you an example here of an E-tran. An E-tran is a large rectangular piece of plexiglass that allows the teacher to put choices in the 4 corners or different locations on that rectangle, and then the teacher can see through the plexiglass so they can clearly see where the eyes are going. So you can, the student sees the words, the choices on their side, and the teacher sees them on their side. So it's just a really nice way. You can be face-to-face with the student and there's no question about where their eyes are going. You could also lay the 3 cards out on the desk or on a tray and ask them to use their eyes to point. Maybe you have a student who cannot point or has difficulty focusing their attention on choices. And so sometimes helping a student focus with something like a counting window really assists them. So in this case, you could lay out the 3 cards and tell your student, stop me when I get to the one that means girl. And then just move that counting window along until the student indicates that that's the one. Now, it's important to note that a student who is non-speaking, who may have difficulty pointing, would need some reliable gesture or sign that they want you to stop at a given spot or that they want that one. And so you'll have to determine that with your student ahead of time, of course. It could be that they are hitting a switch, a speech generating device that says that's the one when you get to the one. But whatever method it is, it could be an eye blink, it could be tilting the head. It needs to be determined and it needs to be reliable. The next assessment that we are going to look at assesses a student's understanding of the concepts of print skills. So let me just open it up to get a little closer look at that. We've looked at it in the workshop, and we've looked at it in other webinars, but let's just take a little deeper look right now. So on page 1, you'll see all of the concepts of print book handling skills listed on the left, in the furthest left column, and then instructions for the teacher to give prompts to the student to indicate that they are able to perform that particular skill. So identify front and back covers of a book, and so the teacher would say, show the front cover of this book, show the back cover, and so on. So we have book handling skills, and then on the second page we have interaction with book skills. So things like attending to pictures, requesting a book for reading, recognizing the difference between print and picture, and so on. And again, prompts are given to determine if your student understands these important concepts of print skills. So what might that look like for a student who can perform some of those actions in a typical way? Perhaps we ask them to turn the page, or let me know when I need to turn the page. Ask the student to point to a picture, or show me where the title is, point to it. But again, we often have students who cannot speak or who cannot point. And so when we ask them which one is the title, we may need to say instead, tell me when to stop, and we can move our hand through the various items on the front cover. We might use a speech generating device such as the Quick Talker that comes with MEville to WEville. There is an overlay that came with the Quick Talker that is specifically used for a read aloud, and so the student could hit the turn the page button to generate that message, or hit stop when they want the teacher to stop as she's moving through items on the page. Hopefully, as we talk through some of these ideas, you'll get the idea of how it isn't all that hard to adapt your question and the method in which your student shows their learning when you start thinking about the way that they communicate. So sometimes we just have to flip our question around. The next tool we have is the alphabet and phonological awareness assessments. So let's just go to the real thing and take a little look. So we have letter ID, names, and sounds. So our first column are uppercase letters, identifying the letters, lowercase letters, and then the letter sounds. So we would ask students to say the name of the letter or point to the letter that is the letter S, and so on. So let's take a look at what that might look like. Again, for a student who could do so in a typical way, we could simply show them the letter and ask them to name it if we're doing letter ID, or tell us what sound that letter makes. Likewise, you could give a student choices if you have a student who has difficulty coming up with the idea out of their head, but if presented with 3 choices, they could pick the one that is the letter B. You can certainly do that to increase the chances of the student's success. But for a student who cannot speak, it's going to be crucial that you provide choice. And so again, you could lay down 3 or 4 different letter cards and ask the student to point to the letter B, or to point to the one that says B. Remind students who are non-speaking to say that sound in their head. We're trying to teach our students to use an in-the-head voice. Even students who are non-speaking can develop that skill of saying these words and sounds in their head so that they can develop the skill of in-the-head reading. For students who cannot point, again, you can use eye gaze to point with their eyes. I've shown the example of the E-Tran here again, but you could lay those cards out on 4 corners on a desk and ask the student to gaze towards the letter B. Next, we have assessments to determine whether your students have learned the sight words. So in each lesson there is a word wall page, and in that page we are specifically focusing on some sight words. And if you have been teaching the lessons in MEville to WEville, you will recall that these sight words are the same for an entire part of a unit, so 5 lessons of a unit, because we recognize that our students need multiple opportunities to work with these words, lots of repetition, but with real variety, so the tasks they're asked to do with those words will change from lesson to lesson, but it will be the same words. So to determine whether our students are actually developing these sight words, we have a couple of tools. So back to that word wall ID, the vocabulary word identification and the word wall identification. So this 3rd column deals specifically with reading the word wall words, identifying those words, as opposed to understanding the vocabulary words. But again, if you need a little bit more description, because you have a student who isn't clearly able to read those words every time, you've got this tool as well, where you can indicate using that scale from 1 to 5 whether the student was exposed to the word, reacted to and showed interest to the word, responded to a word choice in a closed sentence, and so on. So it's a way to capture those little incremental improvements or understandings that are sometimes hard to capture with the students that we serve. So what might it look like for a student who can do this in a typical way? Simply show the student the word, ask the student to read the word. If a student is speaking, then that is the easiest way to assess. But we certainly support many students who are non-speaking, functionally non-speaking. And so again, it will be important to provide a choice of 3 or 4 words and ask the student to choose or point to the word me or point to the word boy. Again, you could use that counting window idea to help focus your student's attention on one word at a time and ask the student to stop you when you get to the word me or other word. If a student can't point, then again, using eye gaze is a really important way for them to demonstrate their learning. Just because a student cannot speak does not mean that they cannot learn to read. We have many non-speaking students who are able to read. Well, we just have to get creative about the way we assess them in their reading. The next tool I want to show you is the writing assessment tool. And a word about this tool, what I suggest. So while this tool gives instructions about a specific writing task for the assessment, we recommend that you actually focus on these stages of writing that are described on the assessment, but rather than having them copy a word, which is what they've indicated, we suggest that you use a sample of their daily writing, or you provide a picture prompt to stimulate ideas. Students need opportunities to write letter by letter every day, and so that we can start tracking their progress as writers. This developmental writing scale will help you do that. So in our developmental writing scale, there are 7 stages. A student who is at the drawing or picture writing stage. Stage 2 is scribbling. Stage 3 is a student who's using random letters, but not in a very focused or purposeful way. Stage 4 is a student using semi-phonetic writing, so sometimes we call it inventive, early spelling, so they have some of the correct letters and sounds. We have a student who at stage 5, we call them the phonetic writer, who are beginning to use the beginning and ending sounds consistently. Stage 6 is our transitional speller, who is starting to sound out words. And so while they may not always get the right letters, they are getting most of the right sounds at the beginning, the middle, and ending of the words. And then stage 7 is our conventional speller, where most of their words are spelled correctly. So here's a couple of examples of those early stages. A student who is using drawing to communicate their ideas. Stage 2, a student who is scribbling, so they seem to understand that these ideas and words are comprised of these shapes, and so they're trying to approximate these letter shapes, but they don't really follow any convention of putting them in order or actually using real letters. And then a student at stage 3 is actually using real letters, but they're put in a random order and not necessarily grouped in groups of letters like words. And they may combine drawing with their use of letters, which we definitely see in beginning writers. So having those stages as a way to compare your students' writing really helps you to track growth over time. And so we recommend that on a regular basis you are taking samples of their writing and assigning a stage to it and date that, so that over time you have evidence to show that the student began the year at that drawing stage, but by November they'd moved into random letters. And this will become really clear with your writing samples. All of this depends on the fact that students would have access to writing every day. So we want daily writing, and writing where students are using all 26 letters. But what about a student who can't write? So they can't hold a pencil and be able to form any of those shapes or words or drawings. Sometimes a pencil grip will be enough to stabilize a student like that, but other students may actually need to move from using pencils to a keyboard or some sort of alternate keyboard and a word processor. If they require an alternate keyboard, you will probably have input from an occupational therapist, but then we would just evaluate the writing as if they had written it by hand. And so if they're using random letters in a stream, we would call that scribbling, because there isn't any real rhyme or reason to it. But as they start to group letters into words or start using the beginning sound of a word intentionally, we can see that by the letters that they're typing on the keyboard. You could also use things like letter stamps or magnetic letters, but the key is that the student has access to all 26 letters. And for some of our students, it's going to be a much longer process than for a student who can hold a pencil in a traditional way. Well, what if you have a student who cannot write and they can't use a keyboard? So there are methods that can be used, and this method that you see in the picture is called an alternate pencil. And so the student is using that E-Tran idea and using their eyes to gaze towards different parts of the E-Tran to tell their partner which group of letters they'll find their letter in. It requires a partner who will then transcribe those choices for the student. You can imagine that this is a painstaking process, but for some of our students, this is the first way that they'll be able to really start to compose their own messages. If you want to learn more about how to use that alternate pencil idea, on the resources page of the TCDSB Me2We site, I have listed and linked you to different professional development videos from the Dynamic Learning Maps professional development site. I shared this site with you at the workshop and have talked about it in some of our other times together. I really recommend you check this page out and check out some of the links to these videos. Specifically, you'll see that there is one there for writing with alternate pencils. And this video, it's about 30 minutes long, and it shows you exactly how this method works and how you can get those students who are unable to speak and unable to hold a pencil or use a keyboard, how you can get them writing, because it's vital that as we are developing literacy in all of our students, that they too have access to 26 letters. It's a harder thing to do, but it is absolutely possible. You have unit objective tracking tools for each unit, and these tools allow you to indicate when you taught different units, different lessons, and each page in those lessons. So in Unit 1, in Lesson 1 on the vocabulary page, our lesson objective was to choose and talk about preferences. And so you can date when you did this lesson with your students, and again you can use this scale to indicate your students' level of understanding. But it's a nice way for you to track what you have covered over the course of the year with your students in terms of the lesson objectives. And then finally, I want to share with you the Emergent Literacy Behaviors Checklist. So all of the assessments up till this point, all of the tools, can be located on the Members Only site under that Assessment tab. This is one that I have found and I want to share with you, and as I say, I'm going to make it available to you on our website. So this is a really nice tool for you to start gathering a profile of your students who are at that emergent literacy level, all in one place. And let me just go to the actual document so that you can get a closer look. So there are 10 pages to this document, and it starts with explaining how you're going to use this. We're going to document information about your students' understanding of their interactions with books, engagement in the act of reading, interaction during literacy activities, their engagement in storytelling, and so on. You can, so each student who is at the emergent literacy level will have their own one of these. You will fill one out for each student. And now you can look at, a few times a year or once a term or twice a term, you can look at these emergent literacy behaviors and indicate where your students are at different times of the year with these different skills. So it's quite a comprehensive list of emergent skills. It kind of takes all of those things we were talking about and helps you capture it in one place. This would be a great tool to have with you at a parent-teacher conference to talk to families about how their child is progressing in their emergent literacy skills. This could really inform your IEP writing and, of course, inform your instruction. So just Couple of reminders when you're doing these, using these assessments. Don't forget to use the picture, symbol, and word cards that come with the kit. Make use of that quick talker and overlays for your non-speaking students for the assessment, but also for some of those very specific activities on every page of the lesson. As always, I need to point out that the Quick Talker is not a comprehensive communication tool. If you have students who are functionally non-speaking, they require a tool that will serve them throughout their day, throughout their life, so that they can comment and talk and ask questions about other things. But this tool is specifically designed so that you have a way to involve all your students in specific activities. And then don't forget to use that action dictionary to come up with ideas for adapting the method in which you will assess your students, or come up with ideas of your own. Hopefully, some of the examples I provided today have kind of got you thinking about how you can make this happen for your students who can't do things in a typical way. Let's remember that we do these assessments to inform our teaching and decision making. This isn't a science that we are capturing here. Some of it is we're using our judgment. We're giving them lots of opportunities to show understanding of portions of skills. But what we're really trying to do is understand our students better so that we know how to program for them to be moving them towards conventional literacy. Because remember, this emergent literacy stage that our students are at is the starting point. It's not the end goal. And so by tracking their growth over time, this can really help us in designing and using programs to move them along. Don't forget to visit the TCDSB Me2We site to learn more. Don't forget to check out the webinars page if you have missed webinars in the past, or to point your colleagues towards webinars. But as you can see, there are links to several pages there that can really enhance your implementation of this resource. But as always, if you have any questions about anything that we've talked about in today's webinar or anything else regarding MEville to WEville, feel free to shoot me an email, and if I can answer it by email, I absolutely will.